This second video in assessment and ESL. In this video, we're going to dig into the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment. In other words, feedback versus the grades. We're really going to focus in this video on feedback and how to use it in your classroom to make a real difference for your students' learning. If you're in my class, I've already asked you to read this article. It's one of the articles that have really shaken the way I teach and understand giving feedback. So if you haven't done so already, go pause and have a look and read through this article because it'll help you to understand much better. Okay, so just a refresher. According to Wiggins, what is feedback? Well, Grant Wiggins explains that feedback is one of the most powerful tools we can use as teachers in our classroom to help students improve in their learning. And it's information about how students are doing in their efforts to reach a goal. And this is kind of key, their efforts to reach a goal. How close are you to getting there? I think he uses a lot of sports analogies. How well are you hitting the ball? Are you able to make someone laugh? Most importantly, it does not include value judgments. And this is where feedback really deviates from grades. It doesn't tell you that you're getting an A or a 6 on 10. It really talks about how well you're getting close to the goal. So in language, if you think about that, the goal of language and communication is to communicate well in English. Are you able to be understood when you speak English? Are people able to understand you when you write in English? And can you understand other people who are communicating with you when they speak and write in English? So it's all about the effectiveness of communication. So keep that in mind whenever you're considering about feedback. Our goal is always helping students to communicate and be understood and understand effectively in English. All right, so let's do a quick exercise. I'm going to show you some different things that teachers might say or write on papers, and I want you to identify which ones give information about ability in relation to a set standard, and which ones are there to help students learn. So this is the difference between kind of evaluation and feedback. Here's the first one. I saw you hesitate, then use the expression we practiced to take your time. You used the strategy really well. You are on target. When you speak more slowly, I understand you better. 9 on 10. You exceeded expectations. All right, hopefully you were able to identify that the ones in red were talking a lot more about grades, evaluations, and that is information in relation to a set standard. And the ones in purple were feedback in relation to the students' progress and how they're managing to achieve their goal. Just a reminder, the difference between summative assessment, which is evaluation and grades, these give information about a level achieved in relation to fixed standards. We'll talk about who sets those standards and where you can find them in another video. These are usually in the form of numbers and letters, so your grades. Do you have an A or a 6.5? Those kind of things. Those are evaluation. Formative assessment or feedback gives us information about how to improve, and that's usually given in the form of comments. So let's dig into the kind of feedback we can give our students and some of the strategies you can use as a teacher to help you frame your feedback in a way that's really helpful. All right. So some of the typical feedback, if you're like me, I have a tendency to be a bit of a cheerleader. So I might say things like, good work, yay, fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great on the emotional level to encourage students, but it's not helpful in the sense of it doesn't tell students why it's good work or what they did that they should continue doing. I don't know how many of you have ever received a comment like this on your work, just a comment scribbled in the margin where it says unclear. Okay, that gives us a bit of information, but it doesn't help us to get there and understand why things were unclear. We just know that it was unclear. So one of the great strategies that Wiggins suggests in his article is to add a mental colon after each statement of value. So if you see a value statement like this, add a mental colon. And I would like to add on top of this that because we are in the business of teaching language, and the purpose of teaching language is to help people communicate, I think that we need to frame our feedback as the effect it has on you as a receiver of the message. So rather than what the person did wrong. So is the message clear? Is the message that the student is trying to communicate clear? So for example, if you wanted to say good work, add a mental colon and say good work, you are speaking loudly and clearly. Okay, and we could even take out the good work at that point. Yeah, you're speaking loudly and clearly. I understand you. And if we were writing unclear in the margins of a student's work, you might want to add unclear. I don't understand. Do you mean you want to go? And again, at that point, we could even take out the unclear. You can just say, I don't understand. Do you mean you want to go? That's much more useful for a student. I'm building on top of what Wiggins has to say about the mental colon, and I like to frame my feedback as how, why, how for students. So kind of like a sandwich. The first part is how the message is received. So something like, I can understand what you're saying. Nice, I can understand what you're saying. Now, why is the message clear? I can understand what you're saying because you're speaking slowly and taking your time to think about the right words, which makes it easier for me to understand. How to do even better? When you can't think of a word, use your hands to show me. Explain using words you do know. Do you notice that the last how here often talks about concrete, explicit strategies a student can use? These are learning and compensatory strategies. And that ties into what you'll find under related content in the progression of, in the PFEQ. We'll get into that later on. So I want you to remember the how, why, and how. And we're going to do a little case study on giving useful feedback. So let's say we have a classroom of elementary students, and they're practicing doing yes/no questions. You've decided that that's something you really want to teach them today. How do you ask for yes/no questions? To do this, you've decided to do something fun. You've taught them the game Go Fish. In this game, each student gets 5 or 6 cards, and they have to ask their partners yes/no questions like, do you have a 5? Do you have a 6? Do you have a 10? And the other person would say no, go fish, or yes, and give the card. So the goal of this is to practice yes/no questions. They're working in small groups. They're playing go fish. As you're walking around, you hear one student say, do you have a sank? Now, normally you might say something like, great job. Just remember to use English. Now, the student gets a little bit of information. They know they did something well. They don't really know what they did well, but they know that you're happy about something. And probably the word sank, which they know is French, might be an issue. Let's change these comments to make them more helpful. So remember, we're going to use that mental colon, and we're going to talk about how, why, and how. So the first how is, how? Your question was clear, but I don't understand the number you want. I understood the expression we're practicing. Do you have a... But I don't understand the last word. How can they improve? Keep using those expressions. Keep using do you have a, but remember to look at our numbers poster. How do you say sank in English? 5, right. Do you have a 5? There you go. Keep practicing. So we have our how, why, how sandwich here. Because competency 1 is one of the toughest ones for teachers to evaluate and give feedback on, I'm going to give you a few strategies here for how to give explicit feedback for oral interaction. There's 5 different strategies that we've identified, and I'm going to give you some examples of each. The first one is explicit correction. So as you're walking around listening to those kids play cards, you can explicitly correct them. You can clearly indicate that what they were doing was incorrect and provide the right form. So for example, you hear a student say, I have 10 years hold. right? The teacher would walk around and say, okay, in English, we don't say have, we say I am 10 years old. We say am old, no H. Can you repeat? I am 10 years old. Good job. The second strategy is called recast and repetition. So rather than explicitly explaining what was wrong with the student's utterance, you just use your intonation to highlight the error. So for example, a student says, I have 10 years old. I am 10 years old? The student would probably nod. You say, okay, repeat. I am 10 years old. So you can see that there's a little bit of overlapping between the explicit one and the recast and repetition. The next strategy is called elicitation. In this strategy, teachers use questioning techniques. Okay, you can say, how do we say that in English? Okay, so it's more like scaffolding. So for example, or you can ask the students to reformulate the sentence. Say that again. And it requires more than yes, no. So for example, this is something my students say a lot. Me, I'm sportif because I do a lot of sport. The teacher would say, you're what again? I'm sportif. But how do we say sportif in English? You're right that there's a sport in there, but we don't use the word sportif. How do we say sportif in English? Yeah, and then you would scaffold them if they needed help. Maybe you would ask a friend. You can say, are you an athlete? Let's use that word. So are we athletic? Yes. Again, you can see that there's some overlap. The next one is giving metalinguistic cues. So if students know enough about a language, you can provide information about a student's utterance that can help them. So if a student would say something like, my departure was hâtif, teacher can say, I think you're using a French word. Hâtif is a different word in English. Did you mean you left early? Or if the student says, I'm feeling very hungry, teacher can say, I hear an H sound when you say that. Can you hear it? Hangry? What's the difference between hangry and angry? Can you hear that? By the way, a lot of students get this wrong. So one of the tricks I used to use was getting students to bite their teeth together and go, angry, to make an angry face when they say ang. It's very hard to make the H sound. And if they're hungry, they put their hands on their belly and go, hungry. So you can hear the difference between hungry when you're holding your belly and angry when you're gritting your teeth together. The final strategy is to use clarification requests. And this is kind of duplicitous because you're pretending not to understand. So if a student says, hi, I am hungry, or je peux aller aux toilettes, the teacher can say, pardon me? Sorry, I don't understand. I used to do this with them, a lot of humor with my students. But again, you would combine this with something else. Pardon, I don't understand. Did you mean you want to go to the cafeteria? Did you want to go to your locker? Or did you want to go to the toilet? Yes, I want to go to the washroom. Okay. So there you go. So those are some strategies you can use for giving feedback. You can combine that with the how, why, and how approach with the mental colon. All right, so we're going to apply what you've learned. This is my final question I'm going to leave you with. Maybe you can compare this with some of your partners. So one of your students who's playing Go Fish says, no, I am not 5 to her partner, rather than, no, I don't have a 5. What strategy would you use, and what might you say? That's it. And the next video we're going to be talking about is evaluating with the PFEQ. So thanks, and I hope you watch the next one.